This video was made possible by generous people on Patreon. Thanks for supporting this small channel. Hey Ross Trump. What? Can I ask you a question? You know how most of us are worried that we're gonna die from some pandemic? Well, imagine if you're someone who worries he is gonna die except for things he could possibly say in a certain video. Like unpopular opinions? Something like that. You're like Bubsy, don't you? Oh, for the love of... Try not to kill me by the end of this video. Please. I figured a lot of you were in quarantine, so I thought, hey, I might as well make a new video just to keep you guys entertained. Or something that wastes your time, I don't know. Back in 2017, I made a video where I talked about my 10 unpopular opinions, and believe it or not, I look back on that video pretty fondly, even if it's one of my older Let's Tackle videos where I spoke with a conflicting Australian and American accent. I don't know why I even did that. And you know what? I realized it's actually a lot of fun to talk about unpopular opinions, so I figured I'm gonna do it again, because there's nothing better than stirring up some anger from people. You guys know the drill, it's my opinion, don't try to get too angry, yada yada yada. I'm sure some of you are used to it at this point, or if you're a new viewer, then I apologize for not explaining it to you. And let me tell you, if you thought some of my opinions in that video were bad, some of the ones in this are gonna make you want to kill me. But you know what? It's always the discussion that's the most fun part about it. So without any further ado, here are 10 more unpopular opinions that I have. I like the Donkey Kong Country games. I'm sure a lot of people do at this point. Regardless of how angry I can get at this motherfucker, I do admit that his games are a lot of fun. But the general consensus is that 2 is the best of the trilogy, saying it was basically everything the first game did but way better. But am I the only one who thinks the first game is better? Now I don't want to confuse people into thinking that I don't like Donkey Kong Country 2. I actually do really like it, but when it comes to the 2 first games, I've always preferred 1. Primarily because I think the first game was a lot simpler for my liking. As much as I really enjoy 2, levels can sometimes go on for a really long time, and while the new character abilities are a lot of fun, I've always preferred the simplicity and challenge of 1. 1 is just more iconic. It's got simpler levels, it's got those memorable animal sidekicks, it's just better in my opinion. I can't really describe enough of how much I like the game more than 2, I just think the game is better. In fact, I remember when the SNES Classic lineup was first announced and a lot of people were really angry that Donkey Kong Country 2 wasn't a part of the lineup, but I was more happy that the first game was included. Again, I don't want people to think that I don't like Donkey Kong Country 2, I really like the game. I just prefer 1. But I think we can all agree that both are better than 3 at least. Arguably the most important aspect of a video game system, aside from the games it has, is the controller, the only way to transport you into the world of video games. And because of that, developers have to put their time and care into making a controller as comfortable and iconic as they can bloody be. With that said, I think the N64 controller is one of the most overhated controllers of all time. Now, do I think the N64 controller is great? God no. It does have a lot of design flaws, but when it comes to other video game controllers, I don't think it's that bad. One of the main complaints the controller gets is, it's weird because it has 3 prongs instead of 2, so your hands aren't all in the right places. Oh, I can't touch the buttons. Except here's the thing. Not every N64 game was built for you to touch all of those buttons. Nintendo knew about the limitations of the N64 controller and designed each game with a different playstyle. There's a reason you don't find yourself touching the L and D pad for Super Mario 64, because you're not meant to touch those buttons in the first place. That's actually one of my favorite things about the N64 controller, the different playstyles it inherits. You can hold the controller on the right, the center, the left, even for FPS games, which don't always work well with this controller, but the creativity is what I like the most about it, and it offers a lot of interesting playstyles. However, the one argument I will agree with people on is that the joystick has not aged very well. Why they thought plastic rubbing against plastic was a good idea, I have no idea, but that's just the corner they chose to cut, I suppose. I do agree the N64 controller does have a lot of design flaws, but in general, I think it gets way too much hate. It's not a great controller, but for what it actually does offer on the N64, I think it's fine. I do prefer playing N64 games on other systems like the Wii and Wii U, but in terms of just being a controller, it's far from awful.
My opinion tells what I believe, even though the rest they disagree.
Bringing a movie home with you can be an exciting experience. Watching that movie you loved on the big screen and now bringing it to the palm of your hands and putting it on a television. The magic of watching a movie at home is great, but the resolution can also be nice sometimes. I mean, yeah, VHSs were revolutionary at the time, but imagine how exciting it was when DVDs came out and the resolution was so much better, and then Blu-ray came out with its scratch-resistant discs, but most importantly of all, the movies were now in high definition, and they looked great. And as technology has increased, so has resolutions, and we now live in an era where 4K resolutions are a thing for movies now, and sooner or later we could be getting into 8K resolutions. It's incredible. With that said though, I think actually buying movies in 4K is a pain in the ass. Now, I'm strictly talking about physical movies. Digital movies actually do the smart thing by offering their movies at a default price regardless of resolution, and streaming services can give you 4K resolution by default like Disney+. But when it comes to actually buying these movies in 4K, the prices sometimes can be just ridiculous. Let's say I went to the shop one day and I wanted to get a few movies. First, I decided to get Toy Story, which costed about $12. That's a pretty decent price. Next, I wanted to get an action movie, so I'll go for something like Men in Black, which cost $10. And then maybe I'll go for Forrest Gump, which cost $12. And lastly, I want to watch a Star Wars movie, so Star Wars The Force Awakens, which cost $15. Altogether, these movies cost $49. And at the end of the day, I consider that a good deal. Now let's compare those prices to 4K versions, in which Toy Story and Men in Black are both $24, Forrest Gump goes from $12 to $25, and The Force Awakens goes from $15 to $30, rounding out at $104. All because I wanted to buy the movie at a higher resolution. Seriously? That's like highway robbery. And what makes this even funnier is that a lot of movies released in 4K aren't even true 4K, just upscaled 2K content. And sometimes they'll include those high price tags for movies that don't even come with Blu-rays. Like the Toy Story release over here does not come with a Blu-ray, yet Toy Story 4 costs the same price and it does come with a Blu-ray. Fact of the matter is, while I love the resolution of 4K, the prices for physical media can be just ridiculous. And I don't think they're worth it, since I can buy these same movies in 4K on a digital service and they're way cheaper. I don't know if it's because 4K discs are expensive to make, but that doesn't change my opinion. I'm a proud collector of 4K movies, but only when the price is acceptable.
My opinion tells what I believe, even though the rest they disagree.
DreamWorks can be very on and off as a company. Sometimes they can make an amazing work, sometimes they'll even make an underrated film, and other times they'll make some real C garbage. But I think one of the areas DreamWorks excels the most compared to other animation studios is with most of their franchises. Keyword being most. Franchises like Kung Fu Panda and How to Train Your Dragon get much praise from moviegoers out there. And even a franchise that started out great and kinda got worse like Shrek still gets a lot of respect from people out there, even though it's become a bit of a joke. So with that said, why doesn't Madagascar get enough love? When people talk about DreamWorks, they often look to Madagascar as this black sheep of the DreamWorks family. I really don't understand why a lot of people don't like this franchise. I think it's great, and unlike Shrek and maybe even How to Train Your Dragon, Madagascar is at least consistently good. At least it didn't start getting worse after 2 movies like the Shrek franchise, and at least it didn't go against themes of previous entries like the How to Train Your Dragon movies. I'm not saying Madagascar's better than How to Train Your Dragon, Dragon as a whole. I just think Madagascar is more consistently good. The stories they tell in each movie tie together. The group want to get back home, and all the different things they come across will teach them that it's more exciting to explore the world. Plus, I love the character designs. I don't see them as lazy. I find them very distinct and memorable. And speaking of characters, I like these characters. They're not amazing, but I just enjoy hanging out with them. They don't have the most original or distinct character personalities in the world, but I still enjoy them and find them very distinct and memorable. I like the zoo crew, I like the lemurs, and I especially like the penguins. They're all fun to hang out with, and it just brings a smile to my face every time I watch them. And oddly enough, Madagascar is one of those few franchises where anything they put out is surprisingly enjoyable. Aside from the movies, which are great, there was a spin-off film which was surprisingly decent, a TV show on Nickelodeon which is way funnier than it has any right to be, and a pretty funny Netflix show. Oh, and there were these 2 TV specials which are also really likable. I think that word best describes the Madagascar franchise. It's just innocent and likable. It's nothing groundbreaking, but I enjoy it for what it is. I don't consider it stupid or over the top or childish. I think it can be very smart at points and really entertaining. It's just a shame that it doesn't get as much recognition as the likes of Kung Fu Panda and How to Train Your Dragon. Between the franchises, I definitely prefer Kung Fu Panda. I mean, that's my favorite DreamWorks franchise period, but Madagascar, I think gets too much hate. It's not perfect, but I enjoy it for what it is. It's harmless, entertaining fun.
My opinion tells what I believe, even though the rest they disagree.
I'll keep this part short and brief because I already made a video explaining my problems with this movie, but Ralph Breaks the Internet is still a bad movie. I don't hate it as much as I used to or as much as other people do, but I still consider it one of Disney's weakest films, especially when you consider that I'm a big fan of the first movie and all the worlds and characters it brought forward. I was looking forward to a sequel, but Ralph Breaks the Internet just retcons a lot of elements from the first movie. Like how Ralph goes from a typical everyday grump to a very clingy and overprotective best friend. The fact that Turbo never gets mentioned once despite the themes this movie's going for. The fact that Sugar Rush only has 1 arcade machine even though the first movie had 2 just so they could go forward with this dumbass plot. But worst of all though is that the characters are just much worse. Aside from Ralph, which I already mentioned, Vanellope just comes off as a bit too selfish in how she wants to leave her game, which is understandable but never considers the consequences. And 2 years after this movie's release, it already feels dated with all the internet product placement. It's nowhere near as bad as the Emoji Movie, but it's very risky to make a movie about the internet because there's a possibility that you could become dated in a few years, and this movie already feels dated. Again, I don't want to go too much into it because I already made a long video explaining it in Animation Explosion, but my opinion on the movie still stands. I don't hate it, but I don't like it either. And as a sequel to one of my favorite Disney animated movies of the 2010s, it could have been so much better, even if that after credits scene is fucking fantastic.
My opinion tells what I believe, even though the rest they disagree.
Every gamer out there has their preference on genre. Some people prefer FPSs, some people prefer platformers, some people prefer turn-based RPGs. I don't. I cannot get into turn-based RPG. Throw me an action RPG game like Kingdom Hearts and I'll get right into that shit, but this turn-based action just isn't my thing. My biggest problem with RPGs is that a lot of them are just the same thing. You get into a battle, you have to wait for your turn and take damage, and you perform the same attacks every single time. Maybe spice it up a little bit with a special attack and revive health or something. That's the problem with RPGs. They're just repetitive, they're not fun, and they rarely spice things up. Action RPG games can keep it interesting because there's always different obstacles every single time, and you have to memorize how you attack them to defeat them. Some RPGs actually do require strategy and different enemies to avoid, like the Mario and Luigi game. But throw me anything like the Final Fantasy games or Earthbound games or anything like that and I'll just get bored out of my mind. Maybe there are more good RPG games out there. I've heard really good things about about Persona 5, but any of this, yeah, I'm not okay with it. I don't find it fun, it's boring as hell. That's not the game's fault, it's just me not being a fan of RPGs. Sometimes it's okay to dislike a genre knowing that the genre itself isn't actually badly made, it's just you don't like how it plays. I prefer to get into the action on the ground and keep it consistent. Having to wait my turn, unless it's something eventful happening every turn, is just not fun. No shame to anyone who likes RPGs. Again, this could just be a me problem. I'm just not a fan of this design.
My opinion tells what I believe, even though the rest they disagree.
I've given the Loud House a lot of flack in recent years, and you know what? I think it's time to switch things around a little bit and say something positive about the show. And funny enough, this is the second time I've talked about it in the number 4 spot, the last time being where I discussed Space Invader in the last video. Well, this time I'm gonna say this. I think the Loud House has the best LGBT representation in animation history. Not just animated movies, not just cartoons, animation, period. And I'm not just talking about the elephant in the room. Anytime the show puts in an LGBT couple, it actually works really well. Because there's one thing the Loud House does that no other cartoon has done. Nothing special. Treating it like an everyday normal situation. Most cartoons that exist in our time frame are often trying to play LGBT couples like a big deal. Like, oh look, we have an LGBT couple! We are so smart! They often do this for the sole purpose of getting praise from viewers. Except when it comes to grandstanding your LGBT couple, sometimes that won't give kids the right idea. If you aren't gonna try to treat it like a normal everyday couple, how is that supposed to give kids the idea that an LGBT couple is an okay thing? Remember when Steven Universe tried to have an LGBT couple and it didn't really earn my respect? Because firstly, they're not actual people, so it's okay guys, and they never address it as an actual couple. Even when they do the fucking wedding, it's more of a fusion thing and not an actual wedding. If they wanted to get married, they should have stayed split, not fused together. This is the thing that irks me about LGBT couples in media. They often try to have them grandstanded and don't treat it like a regular thing. Meanwhile, when the Loud House tries to do it, they treat it like an everyday normal situation. Remember back when Clyde's dads were first introduced? That was such a groundbreaking achievement because they introduced the fact that a character has 2 dads in a completely normal way, not having some over-the-top backstory or some shit like that. It's just telling its audience, hey, we have 2 dads and here they are. And then it happened again later on when the show made one of its main characters bisexual by having her fall in love with a girl. And unlike something like Steven Universe or Legend of Korra, doesn't have it grandstanded at all. They even have them publicly refer to it as an actual relationship. How rare is that in a cartoon? And funny enough, they did it again during season 4 in another episode where 2 minor characters were revealed to be dating and they were both girls. Whenever the Loud House tries to introduce an LGBT couple, it does it in the most earnest, down-to-earth way possible. Not trying to have it grandstanded for praise, just doing it casually. And I think that's a well-worthy achievement. The reason I say this is an unpopular opinion is because a lot of people really hate the LGBT couples in the show, particularly Luna and Sam, and I just don't get it. People often say that they're forced or not that developed, so apparently couples like Laurie and Bobby are, or the god-awful couple that is Luann and Benny. By the way, while I'm here, can I at least add a 4.5 spot and say that Luann and Benny are actually god-awful and I don't understand the love for them at all? Like, people say Luna and Sam are forced, but apparently these 2 aren't. They immediately became a perfect couple in the very first episode they met, and apparently people don't think that's forced. I don't get it. And again, unlike Steven Universe, at least Loud House tried to treat these 2 as a normal couple and not some big event that needed to be taken seriously. Besides, if you're not even gonna do it in the standard way, you're not giving kids the right idea. So take my advice and do what Loud House does.
My opinion tells what I believe, even though the rest they disagree.
I like The Simpsons. Sorry, let me reiterate. I used to like The Simpsons, and that shouldn't really come as a surprise. Many people consider the older days of The Simpsons to be great, and on top of that, many iconic characters like Homer, Mr. Burns, Groundskeeper Willie, Apu, Krusty, Grandpa, Moe, Principal Skinner. There are so many Simpsons characters that I like and consider iconic. And I know that most of the time when all of these characters are on screen, I'm gonna have a great time. Unless there's a certain 10-year-old boy a part of it.
I don't think so. You're all the way in Australia. Hey, I think I hear a dingo eating your baby.
Shut up!
Yeah, I don't know how much hate I'm gonna generate by saying this, but I don't like Bart Simpson. I don't hate him, I just don't like him. When it comes to Simpsons characters popularly considered to be the best, Bart is often at the top of those lists. In fact, if it wasn't for Homer, he'd probably be number 1. And I, for the longest time, just don't get it. I don't fully understand why a lot of people like Bart as much as they do. I have 2 core issues with Bart as a character. The first being is that I don't find him very funny. And this is a major problem with a comedy show like The Simpsons, but if one of your characters isn't that funny, then you fail to find the humor in them. Most people like to consider Bart as sort of a satire on the bad boy trope, except I don't really find anything that unique about him. Most of his jokes just seem to be, ha 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 ha, look, he's doing something really evil, isn't that funny? Oh look, he said hell and bitch, that's funny. But I don't really find it that funny. Lots of Simpsons characters have great writing and witty dialogue, but the core comedy gag with Bart is that he's a bad boy, and that's automatically funny because he's doing it. I don't really find that funny. But the second core issue I have with Bart, which is actually my main issue with him as a character, he's a character I fail to sympathize with. Because of his bad boy nature, there are a lot of episodes in the show where Bart does some really horrible things that fail to make me see anything worthwhile about him. Like, remember the episode where he basically ruins Lisa's friendship with a bunch of kids on summer vacation because he was jealous, even though he brought his best friend on that same vacation? Or how about the episode where he places an Australian boy with a massive phone bill and later brings a bullfrog to the country, which ends up destroying the crops, effectively ruining the entire country, and he doesn't give a shit about it? Or the episode where he basically torments Principal Skinner with peanuts because he's allergic to them? Or the episode where he puts Lisa through living hell because she's babysitting him and he hates the idea of an 8-year-old girl babysitting her older brother? And in all of these episodes, Bart rarely apologizes, and when he does, it's usually at the very last minute. And I know the argument I'm gonna get is, well, he's a rebellious boy, so of course he's gonna be acting like a dick. I get that's the intention with Bart's character, but there comes a line between being rebellious and not giving a shit about your actions. And more times than not, Bart crosses that threshold. You know how people are often worried about sitting through a new SpongeBob episode because Patrick could potentially be a dick? That's how I feel with Simpsons episodes, because every time it's about Bart, I'm always wondering to myself, oh gee, is it going to be one of those episodes where he's a complete dick? And with all those episodes I mentioned, every time I'm done watching them, I'm always asking myself the same question. How am I supposed to like this kid? How am I supposed to sympathize with him when he gets a D- on his test? How am I supposed to sympathize with him when he gets a girlfriend for the 1000th time? The simple answer is, I mostly can't. Keyword being mostly, because like I said earlier, while I don't like Bart, I don't hate him either, because he does have a few episodes where I actually do sympathize with him. Everybody's talked about that episode where he loses a baseball game and everybody hates him for it. As much as I don't like him, even I think the torment he goes through in that episode is way too far. Granted, the episode is a little bit overhated, but still. And when there are episodes where he's rarely acting like a rebellious kid and more as an average 10-year-old boy, he's actually pretty likable. Like the episode from season 4 where he falls in love with his neighbor from next door. He rarely does anything horrible in the episode, and even when he tries to break her up with Jimbo, it makes sense because he's a bully, and considering he's now her friend, he could potentially put him through more danger. Unfortunately, there are very few episodes in the show where I actually like him, because more times than not, he gets on my nerves and makes me want to strangle him like Homer does. Hell, the show itself even tried to make an episode saying, oh, well, even though he's a rebellious kid, he's not that bad. Except that's not the problem. The problem isn't the fact that he's not a psychopath. The problem is that he's just a dick. and that's why I fail to see anything substantial about Bart Simpson. And yeah, Homer can be a real dick sometimes, especially in the newer episodes, but that doesn't change the fact that there are still a lot of episodes where I really enjoy Homer. And I know The Simpsons has several jerk characters, but the difference is, for example, someone like Mr. Burns, he's supposed to be evil. We relish on the things Mr. Burns does because he's supposed to be evil. He's satirical, that's what we like about him. But Bart is one of the main characters, meaning he's someone we're supposed to sympathize with most of the time, and I just don't. Whether it's the old seasons or the new seasons, I'm sorry, I just failed to see anything to like about him. Again, I don't hate him, I just don't like him. There are several Simpsons characters I will love, but he will never be one of them.
My opinion tells what I believe, even though the rest they disagree.
So I just spent a whole segment talking about a character I don't like that everybody does. Now let's talk about a show that everybody likes that I don't. And funny enough, it's one of those shows that I don't think really get much disdain from some people, which may be a first for me. So what's the show I don't like? Well... oh no. Yeah, I'm sorry people, but I don't like The Amazing World of Gumball, and I fail to see what's so good about it. In fact, most times I tend to put quotations for the word amazing, cause this show really isn't as amazing as I assumed it would be. I don't think the show is terrible, but when it comes to the vast majority of Cartoon Network shows that people say are amazing, why is Gumball one of them? To be fair though, unlike Bart, I do understand why some people do like Gumball. It's a very weird show, and it's certainly not mean-spirited. Well, most of the time. So why don't I like Gumball? Why do I fail to like it as much as other people do? Well, it all has to do with the execution. You know how I said the show can be very weird? Well, yeah, that's true, but that's exaggerated in the show. It can be very, very weird, and I know this is the universe that the characters inhabit, but sometimes making your show too weird is too much for me. There's nothing wrong with a weird show, as long as it also has grounded moments to make me sympathize with it. Shows like Regular Show and maybe even Adventure Time do have a lot of really weird elements, but also have grounded in reality moments so that I can sympathize with the characters and understand the drama. Except when it comes to Gumball, it tries way too hard to be weird that it almost never tries to take itself seriously. Plus, a lot of the weird moments in the show come off as forced and not thought out. Sometimes the weirdness can be really clever and funny, like how in one episode where the animation budget gets worse, but more times than not, it often has to do with the weirdness in the world. And I know for a show called The Amazing World of Gumball, this is to be expected, but for me it's too much. But my main issue with Gumball is that rewatching this show, I find it actually has a lot of really unoriginal stereotypes that I've seen a million times before. Like we have the two main male characters where one acts like an idiot and one's the voice of reason, or it's the opposite, or sometimes they're both idiots. We have the smart little sister, the aggressive mother, the dumb father cliche, oh, for fuck's sake. And this problem expands with many other characters in the show, like the cliche girlfriend, the cliche grumpy principal or teacher, the idiot side characters, the aggressive bullies. The show is filled with so many cliches, it's just not clever. And like a lot of stereotypes, these characters will often perform actions that are just so obvious. And maybe that's supposed to be the joke, but either way, I don't buy it and it's not funny. By the way, these characters scream way too much.
I think I need to tell you off, but I've never been the bad cop before!
I want more kids! Begin to cover it! No, I don't! I don't love Benny and I never will!
Grand Theft Auto! Assault with a motorized vehicle! Baby bashing! My sandcastle's got a jelly mold here, and there's no one to scoop out the dice!
No! Mom!
Shut up! I can't stand it anymore!
The show just gets too obnoxious at points. Not just with the stereotypical characters, but the stories they tell are just so uninteresting. And there are a lot of episodes that just feel too mean-spirited, like the episode where Gumball gets replaced by a fucking robot and everybody believes him. And then of course there's the infamous episode that talks about abusive relationships, in a kid's cartoon of all things. And the animation too, sometimes it can be really good. Like I actually do think Gumball has a really unique art style, but what's with the realistic looking backgrounds? I'm fine with different character models, but the backgrounds? No, I don't like it. And sometimes even the animation itself can be too stiff and not all that energetic. I won't deny that Gumball has good episodes, because it definitely does. There are a lot of episodes in the show that I actually think are really good, but unfortunately, not enough for me to say the show itself is good. Because there are more episodes in the show that I fall asleep to or just find too obnoxious to enjoy, and there's unfortunately an overwhelming amount of them. I tried to get into several of the seasons, but they were all just not enough for me. I don't think Gumball is one of the worst Cartoon Network shows of all time. I'd much rather watch this than, say, Teen Titans Go or Powerpuff Girls 2016, but I still don't like it. Maybe I just have a bad sense of humor, but I'm still sticking with it. And now, before I get to number 1, here are a few honorable mentions. Greatest Hits releases never bothered me. I don't like mashed potatoes. The Wii U gamepad is actually a good controller, and I don't know why so many people are hating on it. Mario Odyssey becomes boring once the story's finished. I prefer console gaming over PC gaming. I actually like Hawaiian pizza. And last but not least, Pac-Man 2, the greatest game ever made. Oh my god, Pac-Man 2 is the greatest game ever made. Anyway, on to number 1.
My opinion tells what I believe, even though the rest they disagree.
Okay, so here we are. Number 1. My most unpopular opinion of all time. It's probably going to be even more controversial than when I said Mario Kart 64 was a bad game. So what is it? What is my number 1 unpopular opinion? Well, quite frankly, there's no build-up. People, in this day and age, I hate modern gaming. I'm sorry. I'm not a fan of modern gaming, and most of the games that release nowadays just don't leave the same impact as ones that released many years ago. And compared to the generation we had before, it doesn't hold the same candle. The video game market has shifted so much that developers no longer focus on trying to make their games fun and enjoyable, but rather just making them for a quick buck. And I have several points to prove so. Firstly, a lot of modern games look the same. A lot of FPS games look the same, a lot of sandbox games look the same, a lot of story-driven games look the same. It's gotten to the point where there's rarely any more games that exist that try to have their own distinct style. It's because technology has evolved so much that developers don't have to put in that little extra cash to make something look distinct. Back when consoles used to be limited in technology, developers had to get creative to work around the limitation. Crash Bandicoot probably wouldn't look the way he does today if it wasn't for those games that existed back then. I guarantee you, if Crash Bandicoot was made nowadays, he probably wouldn't look as iconic as he does. I can't begin to imagine how many characters would look different if they were created today, because so many developers don't care about that artistic integrity, they just care about making their games look pretty, and as a result, they just look the same. Thus meaning that most games made in the modern age don't stand the test of time. In 2020, people are still talking about games like Super Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie or Jak and Daxter, because these games were made to stand the test of time with how iconic they are. They pushed limits. That's why people remember them. And they were fun games because they were different from each other. Nowadays, with all these different engines being released and developers having to rework their games from previous engines they've made before, there's no longer that desire to make your game stand the test of time and be iconic. When a game releases nowadays, there are often people that will make a big deal about it coming out because they're excited to play it, and then when those games are released, people will rarely start to talk about it anymore because they're not interesting, they're not iconic, they don't push the limits, they're just another generic game with some old engine being re-released for cash. And let's not begin to mention the countless amounts of games that focus primarily on a deep narrative-driven story rather than the gameplay. You know, games like The Last of Us or the recent God of War. And I'm not saying that a game can't have a deep story. The Last of Us has an amazing story, but I play these games for gameplay. Yes, having a good story is a good thing, but gameplay is still the top priority for a video game. And the new God of War is especially guilty of this. The new game feels so different compared to the old ones, but it doesn't matter because it has a really deep story. I don't play these games for story, I play them for gameplay. The first God of War is fun. Yes, it doesn't have a grand story, but it's still a fun game regardless. Since so many games are focusing on trying to have narrative-driven stories or graphics looking real, it's not gonna make these games as distinct as those from the past. If you want to make a deep story, make a movie. I play these games for gameplay, not story. But with how much money these games are making nowadays, there's also no longer a desire to polish these games, because publishers are so focused on wanting to release these games annually so they can get that hard-earned cash. Remember how angry people got that Spyro Enter the Dragonfly and Sonic 06 weren't polished enough? It was a big deal back then, but nowadays, it doesn't matter, they'll just patch the game out, I'm sure it'll be fine. Except it's a problem that's plaguing so many games today, since money is now the top priority, not polished, and it pisses me off. Fact is, I play games because I want to have fun, and if there are games that are distinct from each other, that makes them iconic, games that are worth talking about. Maybe some people will think that I'm being too whiny or that I'm living in the past because games of old used to be so much better, and I'm not saying all modern games are bad. In fact, one of my favorite aspects of the modern era are the indie games, because these developers try to make these games distinct. There's a reason people are still talking about Cuphead. There are reasons that people are still talking about Celeste, because these games push the limit and try to be unique. And it helps that they are still video games at their core. Cuphead may use 2D animation, but it's still a game first, and a fun game at that. Most developers nowadays just don't care about their games. All they care about is money and just reusing the same assets from before, and it's gotten to the point where gaming is starting to feel dull and pathetic. And that's why I hold no regrets in saying that modern gaming in general is just awful. God damn, that took a lot out of me. But you know what, I enjoy doing these kind of videos. And let me know what your unpopular opinions are below. But for now, I need to take a break. I can't begin to imagine how many people are gonna want to kill me after this video. Thank you so much for watching this video, and a generous special thanks to all the Patreon supporters, including the top tier supporters Nocturnal and Dr. Awesome the Wizard. Thank you all so much for your amazing donations to keep this channel alive. And until next time, keep on playing everyone.